I'm Kaylee Lines, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. Defeated but still defiant Senate candidate Roy Moore doubled down today on his claims that the Alabama Senate election was fraudulent. He responded shortly after a state board officially declared Democrat Doug Jones the winner of the December 12th election. Jones was certified just after a judge rejected Moore's request for a delay. 8.7 million Americans signed up for Obamacare for next year. That's 95% of last year's total. The healthcare law is outperforming expectations despite the Trump administration's continued efforts to gut it. The administration has cut funding, and the individual mandate was terminated as part of the tax bill. Residents in Erie, Pennsylvania are still digging out after 5.5 feet of snow fell over the past few days. The sub-freezing temperatures are expected to hang around through next week. People in the Midwest and Northeast regions are being warned to be wary of hypothermia and frostbite. The U.S. has endured 15 weather-related disasters costing at least $1 billion through October. That's one shy of the single-year record set in 2011. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Kaylee Lines. Bloomberg Technology is next with a lot more.
I'm Corey Johnson in for Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, SoftBank CEO Masayoshi Son is about to add to his tech portfolio. Uber investors agreed to sell him 20% stake in the ride-hailing giant. It's going to go to Masayoshi Son's Vision Fund. Great story here. And a SoftBank investment, a silver lining for one of the world's most valuable startups. We're going to look back at the year that Uber likely wants to forget, but we won't. Plus, more highlights, more interviews with leaders who helped shape technology in the last year, including Bill Gurley and Mark Cuban. First to our lead. Big win. Masayoshi Son of SoftBank, the Japanese conglomerate, closed on a deal to buy a large stake in Uber. A person familiar with the deal tells us that the sale from investors implies a $48 billion valuation for Uber, way down from the $69 billion valuation it achieved not too long ago. The investment's been taking months to happen. Here's what Masayoshi Son had to say about Uber back in August.
I think the way people use the transportation and the lifestyle will be different from today, 30 years later, 50 years later. It will be very different. Autonomous car is definitely coming. And when that stage comes, this rideshare business becomes even more important.
Well, joining us now to discuss the news, Bloomberg's head of global technology coverage, Brad Stone, sitting right across from me, and Bloomberg News Gadfly columnist Shira Ovide, join us as well. Shira, let me start with you. This deal took quite a while for these guys to put together, but it also really suggests that Uber is not what it used to be, to the tunes of tens of billions of dollars.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can't escape the fact that Uber is essentially less valuable than it was a couple of years ago, when it was valued at $69 billion in a stock transaction, and now we're talking about a 30% haircut. And yeah, you can make all kinds of excuses that this is a transaction not from the company itself, but from its existing shareholders. But obviously, it's been a bad year plus for Uber, and it's clear that that's hurt the valuation of the company.
It's really shocking when you look at it there in that great chart by our producers here at the show. Brad, this also took a while to do. Who were the sellers into this deal? Who decided, I liked it at $69 billion, but I don't like it at $49 billion. I'll take 48. Get me out.
We don't know everyone who has sold, and this deal will probably take a couple of weeks to close. But you've got Benchmark, an early investor, probably a seller. Menlo Ventures, another venture capital firm. We don't know yet about Travis Kalanick, who still owns 10%. Garrett Camp, the founder of Uber. But I want to add one thing to what Shira said, right? This was a year of controversy, but it was also a year of very kind of ambiguous or even just negative economics for Uber. The company lost $4 billion in 2017. And, there was a belief in the company company for a long time that they could raise money and conquer and kill all the little guys, the regional players, and that just hasn't happened. Uber faces, destructive competition in places like India and Singapore and Brazil. They've already done deals in Russia and China. The SoftBank deal can help kind of alleviate some of that competition because SoftBank has invested in all these other companies as well.
Well, let's think of some of the things that Uber bailed on this year, right? They bailed on a Chinese investment, a very big Chinese investment. And it seems like, to me, it seems like they got out of that deal pretty good. But they also bailed on their CEO and basically the entire executive suite, such as it was, bailed a lot of ways that they run their business, allowing tipping for customers. The seamlessness of the transaction, get in the car, get there, and get out, is gone.
I would describe it as almost like it was a year where the manifest destiny of Uber to be a kind of monopoly in ride sharing around the world is gone. And that happened because of the controversy, but also happened because there were savvy investors out there like Masayoshi Son and SoftBank that saw a tremendous opportunity here for these other players. And part of it was Uber's controversy, but part of it was like capital flooding into the market and propping up players like Ola in India and Didi in China. So it's not winner take all anymore. Uber's not going to be the dominant player. Yeah. And I think that realization is part of what has led us here today to the fact that on this investment, Uber's taking a valuation haircut.
Shira, you know me a long time, even longer than Brad Stone, and you know that I like my conspiracy theories. Let me posit one, that the last round of investors in Uber had a deal that they would not get diluted in the future, that any future valuation of the company would only be up. We certainly see that in a lot of venture deals. So that's why Masayoshi Son had to pay $1 billion at a high valuation while almost simultaneously paying a lot less at a much lower valuation. It wouldn't trigger that reissuance of even more shares to the last round of investors.
I like your conspiracy theory. I have no idea if it's true.
I like everyone who likes my conspiracy theory, so I like you too. I liked you before that anyway. But it really is. It is striking here that as Brad put it, their manifest destiny is no longer so clear, and you can see it in the valuation.
Yeah, and the thing that I wonder, right, is if Uber is no longer going to be this global winner-take-all, what is Uber? How big can it eventually get, right? We already know, as Brad said, it's losing staggering sums of money. It's had to retreat from various businesses in parts of the world. And so if you invested in Uber a few years ago thinking that it's going to go into Russia and Indonesia and Africa and the restaurant delivery business and all these other places and just steamroll every competitor, that no longer looks like a sure thing. And so what is Uber worth if it can't be successful everywhere in the world?
Brad, it seems that the path to an IPO is wonderfully less obvious and more obvious at the exact same moment. That the time from now until IPO is longer, and they have stated that they want to get to an IPO eventually. I'm not making that up. But also it gets simpler because the varying shares of stock, the fact that shareholders who don't have a lot of money at stake had more votes. Some of the early investors, Shervin Pershivar among them, and the founder as well.
Well, everything has been simplified in this deal with the governance reforms. No extra voting power for the earliest shareholders. SoftBank's taking board seats, governance reforms. This becomes a simpler company. Probably defactionalizes Uber a little bit. Benchmark.
Defactionalized.
Yeah, Benchmark, which just sued Travis.
The old Yugoslavia. The Tito's out, and there's defactionalization.
Yeah, so some of these lawsuits go away. And Dara said 2019 for an IPO, that some of the pressure for liquidity is taken off the table with this deal. So I think he's got room to operate now.
Yeah, interesting stuff. I want to change gears a little bit. We just had some breaking news from Apple. And Shira, I want to get to you on this first. Apple admitting that they've got problems with their batteries. What people have noticed is that it seemed like as soon as the new phone was available, their own old phone got a little bit worse. Apple's sort of suggesting, yeah, you didn't just think that's happening.
I mean, it's always weird when Apple apologizes and said they did the wrong thing. It's not in Apple's character to say it was wrong. But basically, there's this conspiracy theory for a long time that Apple slows down older phones to prod people to buy new ones. And it emerged in the last couple of weeks that, okay, maybe the conspiracy theory wasn't necessarily to prod people to buy the latest and greatest iPhones, but it's been clear that Apple indeed slows down the performance of older iPhones when the battery degrades to the point where they might have these unexpected shutdowns. And what Apple said this afternoon was basically they didn't communicate that fact actively to people who own iPhones, and they should have been more clear about it. And also, look, it's Apple's fault that they make their phones, they make it very difficult or expensive to replace batteries on older phones. And the company basically said they're going to change both of those things. They're going to communicate better, and they're going to make it cheaper and easier for people to replace batteries so their phones have a longer lifespan.
And Brad, they're really, really sorry. What do you make of this?
Well, I mean, like with so many conspiracy theories, it wasn't true, but there was a shred of truth, right? People thought that Apple was degrading the older phones to make you upgrade. You know, that was never true. But what happens, as Shira just said, is they were altering the performance of the phone to avoid the old batteries from shutting down. And in the statement, you're right, it's this "I'm sorry you got mad" statement. They say, you know, some people felt let down.
I'm sorry you got mad. That's my favorite of all-time sports apology, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry you got mad. And then they've discounted the price of replacement batteries, $79 to $29, $50 off next year on batteries. So, you know, it's a significant move for Apple to address what, you know, people basically felt misled by these performance issues.
There's a, it was not a total conspiracy theory, just partial. I know these short sellers who keep a little museum of all the stock frauds of years past, and they have the thing that was invented. Was it a total fraud? Well, no, they did have this little device that was supposed to magically recharge your battery or magically grow hair or something. It wasn't a total fraud, but it wasn't a total conspiracy.
Yeah, in this case, it was like there was maybe a misdemeanor, as Shira said, not fully disclosing
felony.
Why. Yeah, what wasn't the felony that people thought of, this forced, planned obsolescence, but there was certainly something here that Apple didn't communicate properly.
Brad, always a pleasure, especially today. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much, Brad Stone. And Shira Ovide back in New York. Thanks a lot. All right, as we mentioned, 2017, a rocky year for Uber. Eric Newcomer, Bloomberg, looks at the company's past, present, and potential future problems.
2017, the year that Uber probably wants to forget.
They blame everything in their life on somebody else.
Embattled CEO Travis Kalanick resigned. Dozens of executives left. Allegations surfaced of sexual harassment by employees that brought its company culture to light. But that wasn't all. Uber's top rival, Lyft, continued to eat away at market share, riding the coattails of the Delete Uber movement. And one of Uber's largest investors announced it's suing Uber over the alleged theft of trade secrets. To top it all off, to round out the year, Uber lost its London license, was ruled a transportation service rather than a digital one in the EU, and continues to face mounting legal battles from all over the globe. But Uber is trying to turn the corner, with new CEO Dara Khosrowshahi bringing in new legal heads and a COO as they try to right the ship. Khosrowshahi's been on an apology tour the second half of 2017, meeting with angry regulators worldwide and bringing Uber's skeletons out of the closet, such as the massive hack of over 57 million accounts that have been covered up for more than a year. So how did Uber's business fare in 2017? Well, it grew. Gross bookings could reach $37 billion for the year. That's up from $20 billion in 2016. Still, the company lost a massive amount of money. The year's losses could reach over $4 billion. So what's on Khosrowshahi's to-do list in 2018? A new CFO, a new board chair, and new directors. And don't forget, cutting losses and reducing redundancies. But the legal matters loom largest. Uber and Alphabet face off in court in February over self-driving Waymo technology. And the U.S. Justice Department waits its turn, looking into 5 different cases over pricing, bribery, and trade secrets. But one thing's for sure, 2018 won't be the year Uber goes public. Instead, it will be the year it has to rebuild its reputation in the court of public opinion.
That was the one and only Eric Newcomer of Bloomberg. Well, sticking with Uber, up next, we're going to talk to Benchmark Capital's Bill Gurley, one of our favorites, and one of Uber's first investors. We're talking about the state of the ride-sharing company and the changes already implemented by its new CEO. And Bloomberg Technology live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology, weekdays, 5 o'clock back east, 2 o'clock on the West Coast. This is Bloomberg. Well, Benchmark's one of Uber's earliest investors and played a big role in the dramatic ousting of the former CEO Travis Kalanick over the summer. Bill Gurley stepped off the Uber board early this year, but he's still vocal about the company. Bloomberg's Emily Chang spoke with him in November about this summer's unexpected turn of events and leadership under the new CEO, Dara Khosrowshahi.
And I know through my own conversations with Dara that he's getting good advice and help from Travis. So when I look at the current situation, I feel extremely happy relative to where we were, say, back in May or June. I think the entire board, including Travis, is excited about Dara as CEO. I think he's doing an incredible job. I think he did a great job in interfacing with the regulatory bodies in London. He did it again in Brazil. We've just added Tony West, who Eric Holder helped us hire, and so I feel really good. I think we've probably reached a new level of stability, and I look forward to where we are going forward.
Benchmark pushed for Travis's resignation and took it so far so as to sue him. That stunned a lot of people. Why did it come to that? Why couldn't you resolve that in private?
Yeah, look, I think any venture capitalist, hopes that they can use persuasion to solve every problem that's out there so that stuff doesn't kind of roll out onto the field like it did in this case. This summer, things at Uber had reached a place where we felt, along with, by the way, four other very large investors. So people typically say Benchmark, but there was 5 investors, including Fidelity, who felt like all of the constituents at Uber were at risk if action didn't happen sooner. And so we did something unprecedented. Look, the number 2, we get 2 questions quite frequently about this. One is, I can't believe you did this, and the other one is, why didn't you do this sooner? And there's no Venn overlap between those 2 things. And so we were in a place where we had to make a very hard decision. We, after much reflection, felt that we were on the right side of history. And at this point in time, I feel like we've got things to a place where there's a really good platform for success moving forward. And so while I wouldn't say that the past year has been something that we enjoyed as a firm or would look forward to doing again, I do think we made the right decisions.
Is there anything, Bill, that you think you could have done sooner? And when other companies look at this situation, what should they learn?
Yeah, look, I think that's a fair question, and we've already stated publicly we wish we could have moved sooner. We're minority shareholders in all these companies. We don't act unilaterally, and so to a certain extent, you have to be successful with that persuasion element to bring everyone along. I guess the thing I would say is that, the excessive amount of capital that's been available to Silicon Valley has allowed a lot of entrepreneurs to run without much discipline, because if you're not running out of money, you're not constantly being regraded and asked to come back to the table. And one of the unique things about the Stitch Fix situation is just how early the model moved to profitability and how unusual that was relative to everything else. And so if you're going to move up, if you're going to grow up, if you're going to mature, that involves not only being big and taking market share, but putting in, the right functions and governance and finance and legal, and maturing as a business and doing the right things relative to human relations. And so all those elements have to be present. Should we have seen it sooner? I think almost certainly yes. Once we got conviction, along with these other shareholders, that we needed to take action, we moved as fast as we could.
Benchmark hired its first female partner, Sarah Tavel, earlier this year. This amidst, a string of sexual harassment allegations that have hit the VC industry pretty hard. How big a problem do you think this is, and what will it take to change?
Well, look, I think there is change happening, and I think there are 2 elements that lead to change. One is constant conversation and awareness building, which is happening through all the conversations that have been happening, including this one right here. And so all those things move the ball forward. we are super excited about Sarah being on board. She's made 2 investments, although I don't think either of them are announced. And she's, she's super competitive. So we think she's going to be an incredible venture capitalist. But every single data point helps. I look at, Katrina, so Stitch Fix, people may not know this, over 80% of the employees are female, over 60% of the management team's female, over 60% of the board is female. And I found out this morning she may be the youngest female founder to actually take their company public ever. And so these success points and data points create role models that help bring everything forward.
I was Benchmark Capital's Bill Gurley talking to Emily Chang of Bloomberg. Well, much more coming out on Bloomberg Technology, but first a feature I want to bring to your attention, an interactive TV function. You can find it if you go to the Bloomberg terminal, go to TV Go, and you can watch us live. Look, that's me. If you miss an interview, you can go back and look. You don't have to look at me. You can look at whatever you want to see. You can send our producers messages while we're on the air, play along with the charts that we bring you on the air. Bloomberg subscribers only. Check it out at TV Go. This is Bloomberg. Headlines grabbing our attention. A Chinese court has seized all the known assets owned by LeEco founder Jia Chuting, an entrepreneur who once declared war on Apple and Tesla. A Beijing court seizing more than $200,000 in bank deposits, also eyeing Jia's other assets. The seizure deals yet another blow to LeEco. It's expanded aggressively into smartphones, automobiles, and borrowing heavily against equity. But then it faced, of course, a serious cash crunch. Is what happens when you borrow heavily sometimes. All right, little doubt the Nintendo Switch is a hit, but new estimates from a top company executive show the console's on pace to become one of the most successful popular gaming products ever, at least in terms of hardware. The console's on track to sell 14 million units this year. Nintendo President Tatsumi Kimishima told a Japanese newspaper he wants to sell more than 20 million consoles next year. And on Wednesday, we learned that a regulatory found that Apple CEO Tim Cook got a big pay raise in 2017, paid off more than $100 million. Also, an interesting detail, Cook's travel. The board of directors is now making the CEO, making him fly private when he travels in the interest of security and efficiency. Headlines throughout 2017 were almost enough to give up hope for technology, but there are legitimate reasons to be optimistic about tech in the coming year. We'll discuss next. If you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen to Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. and Sirius XM at station 119. Check it out. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Kaylee Lyons, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. President Trump has been briefed on today's terror attack in Kabul, Afghanistan. Officials say Chief of Staff John Kelly is providing updates. More than 40 people were killed and at least 80 wounded. It's the latest attack by the local affiliate of Islamic State. Police and emergency crews were on the scene in downtown Seattle after a van rammed into a building. Officers say 4 people were taken to a hospital. The vehicle, a shuttle express van, ferries passengers throughout the metro area. Italy's Prime Minister Paolo Gentiloni says the government will continue to carry out its duties even after it hands over temporary control to the President of Italy. The president dissolved the nation's parliament today, which could trigger a period of political instability leading up to elections on March 4th.
We are not going to pause the work of the Italian government. We will entrust the government in the hands and decisions of the President of the Republic, who I thank for his work as the constant role of guarantor of the institutions that he carried and will continue to carry out. It will be up to President Mattarella to decide the timing and procedures of the next institutional steps.
Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Kaylee Lyons. This is Bloomberg. It's just after 5:30 p.m. here in New York, 6:30 Friday morning in Hong Kong. I'm joined by Bloomberg's David Inglis with a look at the markets. David, good morning.
Good morning. And yeah, it's Friday. It's the last trading session of the year. We're gearing up. It's looking quiet, but at these levels, we simply just have to hold the ball, really. We'll be closing out 2017 at all-time highs. Another thing I do want to note, of course, barring a roughly 1% collapse over the next 24 hours, we'll likely be clocking in globally, of course. Global equities, 14th straight monthly gain. First time on record we haven't had a single monthly drop January to December. Now, have a look at some of these benchmarks right now. Just one thing to note, New Zealand, of course, half day today, so that's closing in about 2 hours from now. Nikkei 225, maybe some declines at the open. Not bad, though, when you look at the benchmark, 173.40 on the MSCI. As long as we hold at these levels, record high close. Now, have a look at currencies. This is what a little bit of a complication today. Dollar dump, of course. You know, a lot of these things simply come down to the fact that the dollar has been on the back foot, 120 on euro, and obviously commodities on the longest streak of gains going back to 2005. So that's a wrap of markets early this Friday. I'm David Inglis. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
Corey Johnson's Bloomberg Technology. All right, there are a lot of reasons to be suspicious about technology, whether it's fake news or stalking on social media. But Max Chafkin of Bloomberg Business Week thinks there are a lot of reasons to be positive about technology going forward in the coming year. I talked to Max about his arguments. But first, we talk about some of the things that made us fall out of love with tech.
It's depressing because of a whole bunch of reasons, but probably the first place to start would be sexual harassment and gender in Silicon Valley. It's easy to forget, but this whole kind of conversation around sexual harassment kind of started with a blog post written by an Uber engineer, Susan Fowler, who complained about basically treatment of women at Uber, and that led to the resignation of Travis Kalanick. And I think you could argue a lot of the conversation that's happened since then has been driven by the tech industry. So that's one. The other would be the role of social media in misinformation. It's easy to remember that a couple years ago we were very, we're really starry-eyed about things like Facebook.
Right. There's a belief that Twitter was going to lead to this terrific new spring in oppressed societies and so on. And what we're seeing is quite the opposite. Is that Russia and North Korea have been able to use social media to actually spread their oppression. Yeah, and I think, when you just talk to people in Silicon Valley, the mood is just not as optimistic as it's been. And I think some of that has to do with, we've been in a period of growth for a long time. I think there's a feeling that, that boom has wound down a little bit. Series A rounds, the earliest rounds, are not happening with as quickly as they were. And you just talk to people, they're just not as enthusiastic. I mean, I think there's a feeling, even among people who are real believers in tech, that maybe we need to think about tech's role in society. So let's put on optimistic hats, one that I'm not typically wearing. 5G right around the corner. That excites you?
Yeah, so this is something that I think, it's easy, especially in the way people are really upset about the net neutrality rollback. A lot of people in Silicon Valley are. And it's easy to forget that we do have some really exciting things happening in telecom. And one is that, the consumer electronics companies and the big wireless equipment manufacturers are really getting ready to roll out much faster speeds. We're talking about 100x what it is today. That's going to start, it's being tested right now. Verizon has said they're going to bring it to a handful of markets next year, and really by 2020, so just a couple years from now, you're never going to have to worry about like slowdowns in bandwidth or bandwidth caps, or remember the days when people would go on vacation and they'd come back with a $10,000 cell phone bill, or your kid gets a hold of your iPad and all of a sudden crazy things happen. That's coming to an end, and the really exciting thing here, to me anyway, is that some of these wireless companies really have a shot of putting pressure pressure on the big internet service providers. So T-Mobile has said that they're going to, have a wireless, a competitor to the broadband companies, which could create more competition, which would, hopefully be good for consumers.
You've also got an interesting development with commercial space business, sort of a pullback in investments in NASA, and you've got, Elon Musk at SpaceX, you've got Jeff Bezos with his efforts, you've got Lockheed Martin with some interesting efforts as well, and then you've got companies like Orbital Insight with better use of satellite technology for all kinds of interesting ideas. It seems that space is an area where there's a lot of investment and a lot of potential for excitement.
Yeah, I think people tend to forget that, the technology landscape goes beyond the internet, and it's true that we've seen a lot of exciting, IPOs. We've seen a lot of, amazing things happen with some of these big, internet companies. But, for the last, 5 years or so, there's been a lot of interesting stuff happening, kind of semi under the radar. I mean, I don't think SpaceX, which is Elon Musk's space company, is going to go public next year, but it probably could. I mean, its business has been growing really quickly, and really there seems like a lot of upside. They just had a very successful launch, the first launch of a both reusable rocket and reusable spaceship. They have another rocket, the Falcon Heavy, that they're getting ready to go right now. So I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of good news, I would predict, around space, and it's something that hasn't gotten that much attention. I think people are probably getting more excited about this industry than they've been in decades. So that's pretty cool.
There's also some interesting developments in new media, as of someone who's spent a lifetime in media, or most of a lifetime in media. There's some interesting, whether it's Snapchat or I love in your story on Bloomberg.com and in the Bloomberg Terminal, you heightened my new obsession, which is HQ. It's enormously fun Jeopardy for the mobile phone, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and what's kind of cool about that, there's a lot of kind of hand-wringing. People in the media world have been talking a lot about how these big platforms, Facebook and Google, have been just swallowing up all the money, and how you can't get anything going without being inside of one of these bigger companies. And here comes along HQ. It is not on YouTube. It's not on Facebook. It's just it's an app. It's doing something that's totally novel, where it's like a game show, except it's interactive, and it just kind of has a feel to it that feels new. And it's possible that it's a fad. I mean, it's been growing very quickly, though who knows how that's going to play out over the next few weeks. But just the existence of this thing gives me optimism that there's still innovation, creativity coming out of the sort of media technology landscape. And
there's also. Yeah. As you point out in your piece, there's also old media. It's just a part of a sentence in your story, but you mentioned NPR and their dominance in podcasts, and not just because I've got a podcast. It's called Coast to Coast. You can download it on the iTunes Music Store, Bloomberg.com, or on SoundCloud. But more importantly, NPR is an old media company in a lot of ways, very involved and very dominant in this new media of podcasts.
Yeah. And I think another cool startup that's kind of tangentially related to this, that I'd also put in this kind of independent media little boomlet, is Patreon, which is kind of like the payment end for some of these new podcasts. It's like basically takes the NPR funding model and lets anybody do it. We've seen some pretty successful podcasts. Corey, maybe you should consider it for yours. You generate a decent amount of revenue using Patreon. So again, there's stuff happening kind of at all layers of the food chain that is new and kind of interesting.
Well, it's some of my conversation with Bloomberg's Max Chafkin. Coming up, you just heard me mention Orbital Insight. My conversation with Max. CEO James Crawford from Orbital Insight is here. He's going to join us to talk about the applications of their satellite technology next. This is Bloomberg. Well, from monitoring the movements of thousands of oil tankers to collecting data from shopping mall parking lots, the uses of satellites growing rapidly in recent years. Helping lead the way is Orbital Insight. CEO James Crawford joins us right now. Glad to have you. We did a thing at Bloomberg headquarters talking about the changes in the satellite business, about the use of artificial intelligence. But first, I just want to get to the notion of what you guys do by way of an anecdote. So when I was a hedge fund manager, you know the story I'm about to tell you, I hired a satellite company to fly over an oil field. There was this oil driller. I didn't believe they were drilling. Their data looked fake. but we couldn't get there. There's the middle of the jungles of Papua New Guinea. So we flew a satellite over, but I had to wait every few weeks before the satellite would be in contact with that area. If it was cloudy, I couldn't see anything. I got some good data. I didn't get everything I wanted. How does your business sort of take that to the next level?
Well, really, we take advantage of changes that go far beyond our business. The commercial space industry has exploded in the last 5 years. So from our partners and from Planet here in San Francisco, we can get imagery of the world every day at 3-meter resolution. From our partners,
3-meter resolution. In other words, you can see basically the width of this table.
Big things, yeah, big things we can see every day. And then we can get 30-centimeter resolution, which is more the size of the top of your laptop, from our partners at Digital Globe. A little less frequently, but it's amazing imagery.
And I think what's also interesting is that it's not that you own the satellites.
Right.
It's that you're able to contract with them to get all the imagery, and then use technology to stitch it together.
No, that's right. And part of the business model we've pioneered is to pay a rev share back to the satellite provider. So we get the Planet imagery, the Digital Globe imagery, the Airbus imagery, Earthcast, and about a half dozen other companies. We have access to all the imagery from all the satellites. And then we put it together using AI, create signals that may show drilling across all of the U.S. or all of China.
Well, I want to get to the AI thing in a second, but it occurs to me that one of the things you're doing is allowing the satellite companies themselves, who know just how good their businesses are, and they just know how bad they are. Right. It lets them leverage the effectiveness of other satellite companies and get a little of the revenue from that too.
That's right. So if the satellite companies, a lot of their bread and butter is map making and it's selling to the government. But if you want to sell to a hedge fund manager, you really, as you've seen from your own experience, you have to have pretty frequent imagery. And so by stitching them all together, we can get much more frequent imagery and much richer data sets.
So one of the use cases that I love is the notion of understanding how successful a retailer is in almost real time. Give me an example there.
So the simple thing we do is just to watch the cars. So just look at them all, see how many cars are in the parking lot. And if it's close to Christmas, it better be full. If it's 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning in the middle of the summer, maybe it's okay if it's not full. But we understand those patterns, so we can look at the images and see whether or not given retailers are doing well or not.
All right, so I've printed out the maps and leaned over and tried to figure out what I'm looking at and how many casing pipes are going down into a well and if that's actually changing. What's interesting, super interesting here, as if this wasn't crazy enough, is the way you're using artificial intelligence to do the work. What's happening there?
So I mean, if you think about the retail example or the oil example, it's really very large. So we're looking at 250,000 parking lots for retail. And that's way too many to have people look at. They would go crazy. So we actually use the AI to count the cars in each of those parking lots every time a satellite passes over them.
So what does the user see?
So what the user sees is a single number for all of Macy's. You know, how does Macy's
but how does that interface work? I mean, do they go to a browser and type in how many cars are Macy's?
Yeah, if they have the right login, they go to the Orbital Insight website and they can see Macy's this year versus same time a year ago, or they can see Home Depot this year versus same time a year ago.
That's incredible. And have you sort of backtest this to see if it's actually going to show you the results that you want to see?
Yeah, we do continuously. We look at the reports from the filings they have to do, the 10K filings, and then compare that to the counts quarter by quarter, year over year.
And you're seeing it's stacking up.
It stacks up well. It's not a perfect correlation. There's other factors. People may go to the store and park and not buy as much as they did last year because they didn't find the color shoe they were looking for.
Right, so ticket size matters too, but at least part of the equation you're able to solve for.
Yes, exactly.
So as you look at this also, there's a lot of other uses, not just hedge fund managers trying to bet the best way to invest, which is a pretty good business already.
Right. So we also sell to insurance companies that are trying to understand flood risk. We got very early results by using 3 different satellite constellations on the extent and depth of flooding from Hurricane Harvey.
Really, in Texas and so on?
In Texas, yeah.
And so what did you see?
So we saw water like Houston was creamed, and we were able to get, by combining SAR imagery with visual imagery, we were able to get imagery at the maximum flood extent and see exactly where the water was, how close it was to the oil tanks, where it was with respect to houses, where it was with respect to retailers.
And so insurers use this on sort of a policy by policy estimation, or is it more they wanted to know the breadth of their exposure?
The real value here was the breadth of the exposure very quickly, so they could see what kind of reserves they needed and how much trouble they were or weren't in.
And finally, the notion of palm oil and stuff. I thought the deforestation another clever usage.
Well, this was great. So the people have used satellite imagery for quite a long time to look at deforestation. But the thing we did that was unique is we trained the AI again to tell the difference between a managed forest and a virgin forest. So we're able to see when a virgin forest is cut down and replaced with a managed forest. And that's what you're really looking for in palm oil. You want to buy palm oil that's from an area that's been a managed forest for decades and wasn't just cut down down at the expense of a virgin rainforest.
Well, it's such an interesting story. I love the technologies that we're going to find in completely new uses for, because we couldn't imagine it was possible. Great stuff. James Crawford, thank you very much, CEO of Orbital Insight. Appreciate you coming down this week. Thank you. Well, coming up, Dallas Mavericks owner and billionaire Mark Cuban on Donald Trump and the presidency, investment in Twitter, and a long view on Bitcoin. This is Bloomberg. Well, Bitcoin resumed its slide Thursday, dipping below 14,000 per coin. Latest blow to the world's biggest cyber currency came from South Korea, where the government said it was eyeing options for stamping out a frenzy of speculation, including the potential shutdown of at least some of these exchanges where it's being traded. Our Emily Chang spoke about Bitcoin and other things with Dallas Maverick owner and outspoken billionaire Mark Cuban. They were at the Vanity Fair Summit in October, asked him about that, but also started the conversation talking about the White House, asking whether or not Trump will last 4 years as president.
To me, there's three Donald Trumps. There's the Donald Trump who's trying to be the president, there's the Donald Trump, the salesperson, and there's the Donald Trump, the Twitter troll, right? When he trolls on Twitter, he's fair game. Anybody can take a shot at him. When he's in campaign mode, you just ignore him. He's just selling. And when he's trying to do his job as president, hopefully you help the people who are around them to help them. I've worked with probably 4 now 3-letter agencies and done things for him that the president has no idea, because that's what patriotic Americans do, and you just let him pretend to be president or do his thing, and hopefully the best happens.
You've made your political views very clear. What are your biggest concerns about this administration?
I don't know, that he just doesn't know what's going on, right? It's just not in him to make an effort to understand or learn, and possibly it's because he's not capable, possibly it's because he's not willing. I just don't see, I don't think he has it in him.
Does he make it through 4 years?
I'd say 25% chance, maybe 30% chance he doesn't. I'd probably be willing to bet against it, not because he's going to do something just crazily wrong, even though sometimes it seems like it, but I think it's because he's oblivious to the institutions in government and oblivious to the laws and rules, and he'll do something and won't recognize that it's an impeachable offense.
You recently bought a stake in Twitter, is that correct?
I just bought some shares.
Why? Why now?
I'm a big fan of artificial intelligence, and I think they're making some good moves. I mean, you see the evolution of the interface on both apps and the web, and I think they're going in the right direction.
Should Twitter kick Trump off the platform?
Nah, you can't do that.
Why not?
You know what? We're in a situation right now where politics is so tribal and our lives are so tribal that in that realm of people who really focus on politics, when you try to make a dramatic move, you increase the amount of tribalism, right? So if you kick him off, all the Trump fans are going to go bananas, and that doesn't do any good for anybody. And he just goes to Facebook, and then you just have the same thing, or he just posted on a website, or there's 1,000 ways to post digitally, and Twitter happens to be the only one he knows how to use, but I'm sure even he can learn how to use Facebook or something else.
Twitter, Facebook, now Google via Gmail and YouTube are in the crosshairs of this Russia investigation, the spread of fake news and misinformation. What is their responsibility?
Well, it's interesting because for broadcast television, if you broadcast an ad that said, you swallow this penny and it'll cure every illness, right? You wouldn't be allowed to broadcast it. There are rules that prevent you from doing it. I think the same rules should apply to digital marketing and digital ads. You can't knowingly accept, take money from, or broadcast false advertising. Yeah. And the same should apply to Facebook and Twitter.
What about, that's advertising, what about content?
Well, I mean, content, look, it's not content if you're trying to promote a specific agenda, right? It's marketing, and there's a big difference. Content can be fact, content can be opinion, but state its opinion, right? Or it's fact-based, state its reporting and have a reporter assigned to it. Otherwise, it's an ad, and particularly what we're seeing coming out when they're using retargeting, that's advertising. When you're in this particular case, they're posting it through the ad platform. If you're posting it through the ad platform, it can't be fake news. It's a misleading advertisement, and it's the responsibility of Facebook and Twitter to recognize this is an advertising platform. We can't allow fake ads to be hosted on our platform.
Last question. Sure. You've told Bloomberg you're considering getting into Bitcoin. Have you done so yet? And what do you think of people like Jamie Dimon saying it's a fraud?
It's interesting because I think there's a lot of assets that are just their values based off supply and demand. You know, most stocks, there's no intrinsic value because you have no true ownership rights, no voting rights. You know, you just have the ability to buy and sell those stocks. They're like baseball cards. And I think Bitcoin's the same thing. Its value is a function of supply and demand. It doesn't really do anything else. I have bought some. I bought it through an ETN based on a Swedish exchange because that gave me liquidity. As
Pure
opposed
Bitcoin?
Pure Bitcoin, yeah. And I'm also involved with ICOs, actually token sales, because I think blockchain is a great platform for future applications. There will, just like the net and streaming created multiple great companies, I think blockchain will as well. I'm involved in something called Mercury Protocol, just to disclose that I think is going to change the messaging, it'll change messaging using blockchain.
How big is your stake in Bitcoin?
In Bitcoin, relatively small.
Well, Emily Chang with Mark Cuban. A reminder, Bloomberg LP is in partnership with Twitter to produce a global breaking news network, a video network that we call TikTok. Well, that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. A reminder that we are live streaming on Twitter right now. I told you there's conflicts abound. At Technology, weekdays, 5 o'clock on the East Coast, 2 o'clock on the West Coast. That's it for now. This is Bloomberg.